خانم کتی انتظار آرشیتکت هستند and green AP که یکم من توضیح میدم یا خودشون راجع به green AP. ایشون آرشیتکتشون رو در تکساس تموم کردن، Bachelor of Fine Art و BS شون این Interior Design and Interior Architect. Professional member of American Society of Interior Designers, credible professional in green and sustainable design and furnishing. Associate member of American Institute of Architects. She lived in Palos Verdes for 16 years. She has 2 wonderful children that I'm happy I know them since very small age. She started her own business in 2006 and has been in design and construction business for over 25 years. She lives in West Hollywood now, provides design services for commercial and residential clients throughout Southern California. She's also a design specialist for Williams-Sonoma Home. I asked Kathy John to give us a talk about architecture, and we decided to do something that is a significant building in California, one of our castles in California. Kathy John, please start, and it would be Hearst Castle. Please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madani, and hi to everyone. I get interested in, I'll talk in English because my Farsi is very elementary. It'll be embarrassing to talk to Farsi to all of you. So I'll talk in English and give you a presentation. Hopefully it'll be a little entertaining and it'll bring some value to you. So what I'll start out with is I'll talk a little bit about George and Phoebe Hearst Sr., which he was William Randolph Hearst's father, and she was the mother. I'll talk a little bit about them, and then I'll go talking a little bit about William Randolph Hearst and a little tidbit of information about him. And then I'll talk about Julia Morgan, whom he had hired, a woman architect, which is just absolutely amazing. He had hired to build the Hearst Castle, build and design the Hearst Castle. And then I'll go into showing you some slides of the interior. Some of you have probably been there when it was open and have gotten a tour, but it's just, it is an architectural wonderland. I love it. So we'll start with the first slide. Are you doing it, Rosijan, or should I do it?
Artista John, you have it? Yeah, we're going.
Okay, wonderful. So let's see, let's go to the first one where it's can we go to the next slide? There we go. Okay, so this is a photograph. This is the best photograph I could find of George Hearst and Phoebe Apperson. George Hearst was born in Missouri. He was from Missouri, and he was born in 1820. He was an American businessman, miner, which was a big, big business back then. Mining was huge, and a politician. He married Phoebe Apperson on June 15, 1862. After they got married, he moved to San Francisco with his bride. He ran to be a senator. He became a senator in 1886 and bought the San Francisco Examiner, which was huge. It was one of the biggest newspapers. Then later, he acquired many properties, of which one was San Simeon, where Hearst Castle was built. In 1870, he built a ranch house up on the hill. He called it Camp Hill, a favorite campground for the summer vacation for the family. And later, Hearst Castle was built there. George Hearst had beef and dairy cattle among fruit orchards, and he dabbled with horse racing as well. So he had all this additional income coming in. He died in 1891. He left his $18 million estate to his wife. So that's pretty huge to have 18 million. Well, it's huge now for me anyway, to have $18 million, but especially in 1891. And the Hearst Memorial Mining Building on the campus of UC Berkeley is dedicated to him. And Phoebe Apperson, she was very into education, supporting especially young girls going to college. And I'll talk a little bit after we get into the architect. She was the one who met Julia Morgan, and she was very impressed with this young architecture or engineering student at Berkeley, and she was the one that wanted her to succeed. So we'll go to the next slide. So here's William Randolph Hearst. He was born in 1863. He was the only child of George and Phoebe. Let's see if I can change my setting. So he was an American businessman. He was a newspaper publisher. He was also a politician. He developed the nation's largest newspaper chain and media company, which was Hearst Communications. He was very flamboyant, and he ran what was called yellow journalism, which to this day we call it tabloid journalism. So yellow journalism influenced the nation's popular media by emphasizing sensationalism and human interest stories. In 1887, he got control of the San Francisco Examiner, which was owned by the father, and he got complete control of it. Senator Hearst empire reached a peak circulation of 20 million readers a day in mid-1930s, which is absolutely huge. So he was the king of, he was the mogul of media, and he had that media empire. He married Millicent Wilson. She was a vaudeville performer. She performed in New York City with her sister. Vaudeville was a type of like the 20s and 30s kind of dancing. She was a performer, and he loved that type of performance. So he was, believed, 20 some odd years older than her. So he married her. They had 6 children: George, William, John, Randolph, David, and I'm sure most of you, if you lived in the US, or you've heard of Patricia Hearst because of all the mess in the 70s. His alma mater is Harvard College. His net worth 3.11 billion, equivalent to 31 billion in today's dollars. And I included this a little bit tidbit for a little bit of interest. So we'll see on your left is Millicent Hearst, who is the wife. Randolph Hearst had an affair with Marion Davis. If you are a fan of silent movies, she was a star back then. And she actually, Sunday night, Turner Classic Movie had a movie, and she was on it. So it's very nice, very beautiful woman. So he had an affair with her. She was her mistress, his mistress, for 32 years. And Millicent, of course, she wasn't happy with this. She moved back to New York, and they never got divorced, formally divorced, but they were separated. And she went back to New York, and she had a lot of money, and she started her own business. And so she was successful on her own, but Marion was the mistress. So I put that in just to be a little naughty. Next slide. All right, so now is Julia Morgan, this is like absolutely, when I was going through school and studying history of architecture, this was huge. This is like unheard of for a woman to be an architect back then. So she was known as an American architect. She was born on January 20th, 1872, and she died February 2nd, 1957. She opened her own her own business, and she designed more than 700 buildings in California. And her best known, of course, is the Hearst Castle. And the reason she got that Hearst Castle project was because of Phoebe Hearst. When she went to Berkeley and met this young engineering student, she was just amazed by the talents and the brains of this young girl. And she said, she should study architecture. And so that's what she did. And she got hired. So, and she was from Oakland. She lived with her parents, and she enrolled in the nearby UC Berkeley School of Engineering, as there was no architectural program at the time. She graduated in 1894 as the first woman with a BS degree in civil engineering from Berkeley. Morgan was the first woman to be admitted to the architecture program at l'École Nationale des Beaux-Arts in Paris, which is huge. It still is huge to study architecture at the Beaux-Arts in Paris. This was amazing. So once she graduated, she came back to California. And then she then became the very first woman to be licensed as an architect in California. And I'm not sure if she wasn't the first in the whole country, but in California, she was the first. In many of her structures, she pioneered what we call a type of building structure, especially for the foundation. It's called the reinforced concrete, where I'm sure you've seen, like in construction, when it's going up, you've seen maybe columns that have rebars going up, and then they pour the concrete into that rebar frame, and that makes it seismically very, very strong. And a lot of the homes in Palos Verdes, the newer ones that were built after 2000, the foundation is reinforced concrete. So I did a project in Rancho PV where it was so reinforced. I told them, whenever there's a 20 magnitude earthquake, I'm going to come to your home, because it was extremely strong. So this is something that she pioneered, and it's just absolutely amazing. She was the first woman to AIA's highest award, the AIA Gold Medal, which is given to very few people. And she received it posthumously in 2014, which AIA gives this award to people who have passed on since. And since there was no AIA back then, they acknowledged her now that she's gone. So Phoebe Hearst, like I said, met this young engineering student at Berkeley, and liked her style very much as a woman and as an architect to be an engineer. And so now we go to the Hearst Castle, and I love this structure. This is just amazing. This is in the, structure is designed in a Spanish colonial revival architecture, but it does have some Roman influence in it as well. Like you've seen the interior pool, the Roman pool, but it's mostly Spanish revival architecture, which is very ornate. And it was taken after a church in Spain, I believe, which Hearst had traveled to Spain many times. He liked that church, and he came back and told Julia about this, the design of it. So Hearst Castle San Simeon is a National Historic Landmark and a California Historic Landmark, which is huge to be national and a state landmark. It was built between 1919 and 1947 by William Randolph Hearst and his architect, Julia Morgan. The property was called La Cuesta Encantada, the Enchanted Hill, which is obviously up on a hill with that gorgeous view. It was the ranch his family would vacation on, where William was little. In 1919, Hearst inherited the sum of $11 million, equivalent to $165 million in today's market. And the states, including the land and San Simeon, he continued to further develop his media empire of newspapers, magazines, and radio stations, the profits from which supported a lifetime of building and collecting. He kept adding on and adding on and adding on. And I'm sure Julia Morgan was extremely busy with her own projects, and then this one, and it said that they argued a lot that, no, it shouldn't be this way or it should be that way. And of course, Hearst, most of the time, he won the argument. So within a few months of Phoebe Hearst, which is Randolph Hearst's mom, who passed away, William Randolph Hearst had commissioned Julia Morgan to build, as he called it, something a little more comfortable up on the hill, because he wasn't so crazy about the cottages, the little cottages that were built on this hill for their little vacation. So he said a little more comfortable. And and then a close collaboration with each other for 20 years. The castle at San Simeon is her best known creation. And next slide. And so here are some photographs of the front elevation. You'll see as it steps going up to the front porte cochere, and it has a very churchy feeling. It's but it's just absolutely amazing. And then this one on your right is where the back of the castle, with the arcade and also the famous fountain. Next slide. So this is the assembly room. This is where his guests would come. He would receive them here. And I believe this room is excuse me, part of the room that when they give a tour, they show this room. It's extremely ornate. And he was his mother was, but he was a huge collector of artifacts and constantly traveling back and forth from Europe to California and bringing these antiques and wonderful, wonderful artwork. And of course, he loved these gorgeous Persian rugs that were the palace size, and just absolutely stunning. And when I visited it was 10 years ago, there were some Persian artifacts like earthenware and some tile work of ancient Persian artifacts that were hanging in some of the rooms that were just absolutely gorgeous. But you'll see here with this gigantic sort of a Gothic style of fireplace and tapestries hanging. It's just I could spend all day there and still miss a few items. So, but this was where he accepted his guests and before dinner time or before meeting with them. The next slide. This was the refectory. This was the main dining room, again, for the guests when this was adjacent to the other room, and they met there, and then they migrated here for dinner. And I have a little bit of tidbit later on. I'll tell you a little facts about inviting guests and having dinner. And he was apparently not the easiest man to get along with. Next slide. And this is a library. I love this room. I love it's, you have to remember that a lot of the items were imported, like wood, building materials. A lot of them were imported from Europe, like marble and like the mahogany ceiling, the coffer ceiling. This is just absolutely amazing. And then he had a collection of Greek vases that are up on the shelf up there. And then again, with this gorgeous palace-sized Persian rug. So it's very, very ornate. Next slide. And this is the billiard room. And this tapestry is extremely famous. It is, I forget the date, but it's pre-Renaissance era. And it was a big item in our art history class. Tapestries were big back in the Renaissance era and prior to Renaissance. So, he, again, going back to Europe, buying all this amazing artifacts and bringing them back. But this is a billiard room where the guests would come after dinner to just, men, I should say, they would come after dinner and just play and smoke a cigar and have a good time. And this is, of course, the Neptune pool, which is very famous. They said the movie stars would go and there were like lavish parties thrown. And most of the movie stars that came was because of this pool. It's so beautiful. And it was designed by Julia Morgan. And she did a lot of the designs for the exterior landscaping, exterior structures as well. So she was really well-rounded. And a beautiful sunset at San Simeon. And then I would like to share just additional facts about the Hearst Castle. So the castle was opened to the public for the first time in June of 1958. There are over 850,000 visitors a year. And the castle, the only time it was closed after 1958, it was when Amanda Hearst, the great-granddaughter, was getting married. So they closed that to the public so she could get married there. It must have been an amazing ceremony. On February 12, 1976, one of the guest houses that was called Casa del Sol was damaged by a bomb. And this device was placed by Symbionista Liberation Army, if you remember the 70s and the Patty Hearst, all that, in retaliation for Patty Hearst testifying against the SLA. So they damaged the casita, a little guest house, just a little bit, but not much of a damage. So then they had, like I said, among the many guests were many Hollywood celebrities. There celebrities such as, among which, Charlie Chaplin, Cary Grant, Marx Brothers, Charles Lindbergh, and also Winston Churchill visited him once. And apparently Winston Churchill wasn't very happy with how hospitality was served there. He told his wife in a letter that William Hearst is a grave, simple child with no doubt a nasty temper, playing with the most costly toys. So he wasn't very impressed. And I'm sure you've seen or you've heard of the movie that Orson Welles directed and wrote. It was called Citizen Kane. And that was, it was a movie that was based on American media barons, which Hearst was one of them. And upon its release, Hearst prohibited the film from being mentioned in any of his newspapers because Hearst did not like the way Orson Welles portrayed him. And then guests, when they arrived, they were pretty much free to roam around and do whatever they wanted to do during the day. But only Saturday night at 7:30, they had to be up in that gathering room at 7:30 and have cocktails. And cocktails were not allowed to be at guest rooms, so they could drink in that room. And only one cocktail was given to a guest. Because of Marion Davis, the mistress, she was an alcoholic. So he didn't want her to have more than one drink, and nobody else could have more than one drink. And let's see, elaborate dinner was served at 9 p.m. And then there were outdoor movies, which generally they were from his own studios. By 1930s, the Great Depression and his lifestyle brought him to financial ruin. Debts totaled $126 million, and this is like in mid-30s. He had to give up ownership of his corporation and radio stations, and the radio stations were sold. And construction was seized. After Pearl Harbor, the castle was closed up, and Hearst and Davis moved to a smaller estate that he has nearby. It was called Winton, but it was a small little cottage, nothing compared to the castle. They returned in 1945 and started limited construction. Construction ended in 1947. In early 1947, his health was declining. Hearst and Davis left the castle for the very last time. The pair settled at 1007 North Beverly Drive in Beverly Hills. And Hearst, William Hearst died in 1951. And after he died, Marion Davis was excluded by his family from the funeral. She wrote to a friend of hers, "For 32 years, I had him, and now they leave me with his empty room." So obviously the family did not like this affair he had for such a long time. In 1958, the Hearst Corporation donated Hearst Castle and all the gardens and many of the artifacts to the state of California. Some of the artifacts were also donated to LACMA. And you probably remember, if you were in California, on December 2003, I believe it was, there was an earthquake 3 miles north of the Hearst Castle with a magnitude of 6.5, which is pretty strong. There was a very little damage to the structure, and this was due to Julia Morgan's reinforced concrete foundation and construction, which saved the building. And because of COVID, the Hearst Castle is closed, and who knows when they're going to open again. But it is an absolute architectural marvel that it's just, I love it. So hope everybody got something out of this and hope you enjoyed it.